A very good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to our 12th EU policy talk that we have been organizing over the course of the last 12 months. And today we're very pleased that this one has attracted quite a broad audience. We have at least about 200 registered participants, and that is showing the interest that people have in the topic. Today we're going to talk a very specific topic, a very specific legislative file. This is the Digital Services Act, a very important piece of legislation, which together with the Digital Markets Act, with the Data Act, Data Governance, there's a flurry of policy and legislative proposal coming our way from the European Commission that is keen to really establish and help facilitating the digital transition of the EU economy. And we're very pleased to discuss the specific file, the Digital Services Act, which is now has been issued by the European Commission a few months ago, is now within the Council and with the Parliament. And we're very pleased to welcome the rapporteur for the file for the IMCO committee, member European Parliament, Christel Schaldemose, who we're very pleased to very warm welcome you on board, and we're very pleased. I know you're doing this from an airport, but thanks for your dedication for doing this. I don't think you need any introduction. You have been in the European Parliament since 2006, so I think you are in your fourth term. So you're very senior member of European Parliament, part of the S&D group. For those that are not so familiar with the EU in Brussels, that's basically the socialist group, and very strongly engaged in a number of consumer files for a while. I think certainly the product safety, consumer product safety file was one of the issues that you were also involved in. And it is very topical that we have this talk and this conversation today. Is very much going to be an exchange. We'll hear from you for about 10-15 minutes. You will explain a little bit what are the key points in your report, and perhaps also lift a bit the veil on some of the suggested amendments, because today was the deadline for the submission of the amendments to your report. So perhaps you can give us a flavor. I'm sure the deadline was today at 12, so I think probably too early for a full analysis. But maybe if you have a sense of where the things are going, be helpful to give us some insights a bit on that. I'm sure you're familiar with. We have had the opportunity to meet with you that our key position for us as retail and wholesales are embarking on this digital transformation. The Digital Service Act, which is in a way partly a revision of the e-commerce directive, but it's much broader than that, is very important for us. And as EuroCommerce, we're representing at the same time organization that companies that hosts platforms, but also companies that use this platform. So we have, with some difficulties, but I think arrive at a fairly balanced position that highlights a number of very important issues, and that is to indeed have legal certainty, to have transparency on the know your business customer principles, on harmonized approach to notice and action, on issues on the fines that we would like to see being aligned with the fines that is in the GDPR regulation, and on the issues, of course, on the legal representative, which is a very key issue. I mean, our sector is confronted, as you know very well, and our Nordic members have made that point to you a number of times, I think, with a lot of flurry of imports coming from outside Europe. And therefore, I think the concept of a level playing field for us is very important from two perspectives. I mean, the point of view of safety and confidence of consumers, but also from the point of view of level playing field, so that we can all compete on the same basis, which is compliance with a very solid framework of EU legislation. So I think this is very much where we're coming from. But I would say over to you, give us some insights, and then I will call on my colleague Ilja Bruggeman, who is our head of digital single market and consumer policies, and is very much well placed to very much be in charge of the whole file, who will curate the questions to you that we have received. We've received many questions, and we'll try to put those to you, and then having hopefully an interesting conversation, not only for us, but primarily also for our viewers, which, as I mentioned, I think it's the EuroCommerce members, but we invite very broadly. So we have a number of stakeholders that are online, also possibly media. So I think it's important to know that that you might also be on record as well to what you say. So Christel, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I do apologize that I'm sitting in an airport, but you know the situation is now it's we don't have enough flight yet, so we have to take what we can get. But I can tell you that it was a nice walk through the airport, because I sense that we are really getting back to something similar like normal, because there were so many people here in the airport, which I find very good. But thank you very much for the invitation, and also for me to give you an insight on the DSA from a European Parliament's perspective as it stands at the moment. Before I go into the topic, let me start by saying that I haven't read all the amendments coming in today, and I've heard that we will get somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 amendments. So it's a lot. I have an idea that it will go in many different directions. Some colleagues think that I'm going too far, and other colleagues think that I'm not doing enough in different areas. So it's going to be exciting also for me to read it, and after the summer break, start negotiating with the colleagues. And before I go into the content, I should maybe also give you the timetable. We are still in the very early phase of the work in the European Parliament. I expect that we will first finalize the proposal adopted in maybe May, June next year. But it's on time, and we're working for it, and I hope that we can finalize the Parliament's position before end of this year, so we can enter into a trilogue with the French presidency in 2022. But what is it that I'm trying to achieve with my report? I think that I have three main areas where I'm trying to work on in order to improve Commission's proposal. But I have to say that I do find the Commission's proposal a very good starting point. I think it is time that we do look into the e-commerce directive. It is not fit for purpose any longer. When we made it back in 2000, it was another world than we see today. But I don't have to tell you about all these things. You know it by heart. You live with it, and therefore I will not go into why it's needed, but it is clearly needed, and we need to do something. I have three main areas that I really find important. First, what you could call level playing field, consumer protection area. I think that we need to look into what exactly you said, Christian, about the level playing field for companies. A lot of goods coming in to the European Union, to businesses and to consumers from third countries online, and they are not checked. We don't know about the content. We don't know whether they comply with our regulation or not. No one does really take on the responsibility. That's not good for the consumers. It can cause problems with product safety, compliance with goods, but it's not good either for companies, because then businesses will experience an unfair practice. There will not be a real level playing field for companies, because those coming in with goods from out of EU, they don't have to work and comply with all our regulations, and that of course costs to comply with our regulation, but they don't do it, and no one is really controlling it, so it doesn't work well, neither for consumers nor for businesses. So I think that that's very important, to create a level playing field between businesses inside the EU and businesses outside EU, but also a level playing field between offline and online world. Shops and companies inside the EU but not selling online, they also have to comply, and they have a lot of responsibilities. You know that we have this chain of responsibility with the economic operators, and they mostly comply with that, and that's fine, but we don't see the same when it comes to online. And I do believe that it is extremely important that we really try to get it into the legislation. What is legal offline should also be legal online. We need to have a level playing field. But I am, of course, also concerned about consumer safety, and therefore the main suggestion I have is to make sure that the platforms, they benefit clearly from the exemption of liability. And I'm not really trying to change that, but I'm adding some extra obligations in order for the platforms to benefit from this exemption. So I think that that the platforms, and I suggested that the platforms should know when a business or a trader from out of EU sell goods online on an online marketplace, then the platform should know who inside EU is responsible for product safety. And by that, I hope that we can achieve something that are almost similar to a decent level playing field. So consumer protection level playing field is one topic that is very close to my heart, and I hope that we really can do something in this area. And I have had a chance to take a very brief look at the product safety proposal from the Commission, and they do not tackle this topic at all. And therefore, I do believe that we need to do it inside the DSA. The second topic is something. On the first one, I think that we might even agree, and we might even work on the same aim. But on the next, I'm not sure that we agree on the same manner. That's the discussion around online advertisement. Here, I have suggested to create a better consumer protection than the one we see today. It's merely based on the fact that the DPR is not really working, but it's also about looking into the business models of the platforms. And I think that we need to adjust this one. I think there is, to a certain extent, a pervasive harvesting of data, and I want to give the consumers more choices and better protection. So therefore, I have suggested that by default, the settings for consumer protection should be higher, meaning that you should not be micro-targeted with advertisement. But if you want to do it, you can scale down the protection. So you have the right to do it. But I think that the default setting should be that you were protected from this micro-targeted advertisement. I know that some companies would probably say this is not good for their business because they need to have access and being able to use advertisement. I'm not questioning that. I think that we still need an advertisement market, but it's the way it is working I find problematic. And therefore, I think it needs to be contextual. So of course you can target people based on geography, age, gender, things like that, but not based on the way people are spending their time on social media. So I'm trying to do something about that, but I have to say that I know that some colleagues think that this is going too far, and I have colleagues who think that I'm not going far enough at all. But that's going to be really a big debate. And then the third thing that I find very important to do something about is the whole questions about how the algorithm of the platform works. I think we really need to look into this for democracy, but also to make sure that we have, a safe and trustworthy online environment for all. And therefore, the Commission has proposed that the platforms needs to make a risk assessment of their algorithms, but I think we need to go a little further. Transparency is not enough. I also think that they need to be accountable. And therefore, I think that I'm suggesting that it should not be allowed to, that the algorithms should not be allowed to create dark patterns or rabbit holes. So the recommended systems of the platforms need to take this into account. I want the platforms to make tests of the algorithms before they are used, and I want the Commission to look into whether platforms are complying with what they're saying they're doing. Not just the Commission researchers, but that was already in the Commission proposal. But I also suggest that civil society gets access to not trade secrets, but how they work, so they can help us making sure that it works in a good and decent manner. So it's also because I'm afraid that many of the problems we see to create a safe environment is about how the platforms nudge users in a certain direction, and that can be dangerous. Also with misinformation yeah. So I think that's important. I maybe forgot to say it when I talked about the online advertisement, but I also think that it is important that it is clear when you're targeted with advertisement. I want to have a label or a mark on, so that it's possible for consumers to see, oh, here, or users that, oh, here I am exposed to an ad, and I want them to be harmonized across different platforms so that it is easy, kind of like a CE marking, so that people know that, oh, this is an advertisement and this is not. Time's running, and I think that I will stop here. But just to give you a kind of an idea about what I'm trying to do, level playing field consumer protection is extremely close to my heart. Being a member of the IMCO committee for many, many years working in this area, I think we need to tackle the algorithms. They are crucial for how the platforms works, but also how companies can use them. And then we need to look into the business models of the platforms. That is my 3 main areas where I'm trying to adjust the Commission's proposal. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you very much, Christel, and a very, very clear and concise overview of the report. So well, immediately let's bring Ilya in, and Ilya, how would you propose to structure the discussions? And I guess you probably have a first batch of questions.
Yes. Yeah, so I think we have a number of questions also were submitted by the participants. We had quite a lot, so I tried to a bit curate them in a way I think that I hope it will address most people's issues that they wanted to put forward. So I don't know if you wish, I can start maybe with the first question. Which I think is linked to your priority, which is also our priority, creating a level playing field. And I think we see the same thing. We see a lot of non-compliant and sometimes even unsafe products from out the EU, entering or crossing the border, and that's undermining competitiveness of our sector. There is a cost for compliance, which we happily want to take, but it also means now that a lot of these products are from outside the EU are sold for less, and it's still price is the main let's say condition for consumers still to choose to buy a product or not. But what we also see is obviously there are many different pieces of legislation that actually could be a part of this, and you already touched also already on the GPSD, and so could you maybe tell us something if you also have a wider view on how we can improve the level playing field also beyond the DSA? Do you think there are some issues can also be solved elsewhere or should be solved elsewhere?
Oh, yes, certainly. I think DSA is not, a silver bullet or what you say. It can't solve all the problems we have, and clearly not in this area as well. I still think that we need so much more in terms of market surveillance. We need to have a better system there, and I also think that we need to somehow. I hope that you don't misunderstand it, but I also think it's important to educate users of platforms, people buying online, that they need to be aware of the problems if they are not aware of that. Well, it can be difficult to be aware of that you're buying things from a platform or from a trader coming out of EU, but I think that we need to learn the users of the platforms about this and make them aware of the consequences. But I mean, the main problem besides the DSA is, of course, market surveillance. This is something that I've been working on for many years, and I still don't think that we are there yet. We still need more resources. We still need better coordination. We still need to work with, for instance, China in order to make them more aware about the consequences. Yeah, so there are many things we can do and we must do besides DSA. But I think that DSA can really deliver a real change if we are successful in doing something with the level playing field and consumer protection. And therefore, I really hope that you will. Since we share this view, I hope that you really will do an effort also to convince colleagues in the European Parliament that this is really a problem that we need to tackle, because I got the impression that many colleagues were afraid of the consequences putting obligations on the platforms. I think they are concerned about filters and other things, but I'm really concerned about European businesses, and I'm concerned about the safety of consumers. Thanks.
Thank you. So maybe following on that question, because I think one of our concerns is also, like I think like Christian said in the beginning, our sector is undergoing a huge digital transformation, and also due to the COVID pandemic, we see online is becoming more and more important. And I think especially for non-food businesses, they had to often close their business during the pandemic, and the only way to go online fast was via also a platform. But we also see that many of our members are becoming platforms themselves, in this sense, it becomes also more important for us to not only look at it from a user perspective, but also from a perspective, what if we are a platform? And I think one of the concerns is that the requirements in the DSA, that they might be too burdensome for smaller and medium-sized European platforms, that it will be difficult maybe for them to be or to remain competitive, and maybe the bigger players are able to absorb some of the cost. But how do you see this? How can we make this workable for SMEs? How can we ensure that there will still be new European small platforms coming?
Thank you so much. I really think this is a very good question, because I think we need to work together to make sure that it is possible to be a new and a small business also online. And I really think that what we miss today in Europe is, in fact, the possibility or the ability to scale up and I mean, we have a lot of good ideas and people are entrepreneurs, but we need to make sure that it works as well. So we also need to find the right balance so that we don't overburden. That's also not my intention to overburden companies. I think that we need, but I also think that no matter how small you are, more or less, if you are a platform, there must be a minimum of requirements that you have to comply with. But of course, we need to be aware that if you're a small one, you shouldn't have the same obligations as the very large ones. And I also think that structure is already in the proposal. But I do think that we need to have minimum requirements also for the small ones, because I think that it is helpful in order to create a level playing field. Having said this, though, I do believe that it is really important that we look into how we can create a good business environment in Europe, and in general, maybe not so much in the DSA, but in general, I think that the EU Commission has tabled a lot of ideas and strategies in this respect in the digitalization or with the digitalization and transition of that, and I think that we need to work together to find the best solutions, and I hope that you also will help me in order to give me concrete ideas and examples on where it might be difficult to work with, and if there are barriers some way along the roads, then please let me know also, because I'm not interested in overburden companies. We have a tendency to make things too bureaucratic in EU, and that's not my will, and that's not my intention. But I think some minimum requirements, no matter what kind of size you have, and then the bigger they get, the more obligations. But I also think that we need to understand that the digital world is different from the physical world in many ways. So the fact that you even have a small startup, it gives you immediately access to a lot of consumers and also cross borders. And therefore, I think it is important that we have some minimum requirements, making sure that we have this level playing field, and that we give the right information to users of the platforms, etc. I hope that this was answer enough.
Yes, thank you. And I think our position is not that necessarily SME should be exempt by default, because we think if it's about consumer protection and product safety, that I think every business has their responsibilities. But I think if we look more at, maybe red tape, administrative burdens, that might, be too much for SMEs. Actually, that brings me, I think, us to maybe a next question is because in your report you introduced a threshold of 50 million euros for, and I think that the question is here, why did you choose the 50 million euros one? And obviously, we consider that very low, and we were still, discussing this concept of 45 million active users. And we have said about that, just for your information, that we think that whatever we say on active users in the DSA should be aligned with the DMA. But now I guess you have opened a completely different way of looking at it. And could you maybe tell a bit more about that? And also, because I think 50 million euros online, that's not that much. So the question is, like, wouldn't this capture also smaller or medium-sized companies?
I expected that question, I have to say. But I introduced this one because I thought that it's not enough just to define platforms sizes only based on users and even active users, as the Commission does. Because if we do that, then it's only the very, very large ones that will be covered by our rules. But you can even have some medium-sized where you also have to comply, and where it makes a difference if you had to be you have to comply with all our obligations, even though you might not be Amazon or Facebook, because you still have an impact and you still need to comply with consumer protection and transparency obligations, etc. However, I would also like to say that the specific on 50 million could also be changed during the negotiations. It could be more, or we could do something else. For me, the most important thing was to say that I think it is not enough to base obligations alone on a definition on active users. I think there needs to be other criteria, and this was one of them. But we can always negotiate on whether it should be that level or we should go even higher. But for me, it was more to make sure that we have other criteria than just active users.
All right, thank you. So maybe a slightly different type of question, because you also, I think talked about I guess, giving more transparency or control to consumers, and I think we all agree that more transparency can empower consumers and to make better choices. But I think at the same time we see that there are more and more information obligations online, offline, and consumers are basically they are not able to cope with all that information anymore. And I think someone once told me, probably the consumer, when they buy a product, they just check 2 or 3 labels, and the most important one is the price. Maybe because I think you did quite some proposals to increase transparency and the control of the information that you see, that that's I think also what you explained earlier today. But do you think there are other ways that we could empower consumers, and are there maybe a role you see for businesses which might not necessarily entail legislation?
This is a very good question. I think that there are, first of all, I agree that we need to be aware of not overloading consumers with information. We have seen it in many ways in the digital world, that terms and conditions, are several pages, making sure that the company gives every single piece of information, and then we just click and say, yes, I have read it, even though no one really reads it. I do it from time to time myself, because I want to try to understand, and every time I read them I end up saying, oh my god, and then I don't dare saying yes to the conditions, and then I don't, for instance, download the app, because I'm not really aware of, I can't I can't see through it, even though I'm used to reading these kind of things. So yes, you can overload the consumers with information. So but that's why I think we need to have some obligations and some rules on giving some certain information, but I also think that we need to do more than that, and the business can really benefit also from being a trustworthy partner to work with, and you know, brands, for instance, they have the benefit that if consumers start trusting them, then they will keep on buying from them, because this brand I know, so I'll do it. That no matter what kind of consumer goods we're talking about, that has that's often the case, that the people end up trusting it. So the better a business is, the better it will help. And then if you trust as a consumer, a business user buying somewhere, you will keep on buying that place if you trust them. So trust, so doing what you're saying you do and give good service is always a thing that will help the consumers making the right choice. But I do believe that it is important to have more information, but it's also need to be the right kind of information and served in a way that is easy accessible for consumers. But service in general is always important. That's also one of the things I'm suggesting, is that I think it is extremely important that you will be able to get in contact with for instance, the platform, or the platform makes first the platform, but also making sure that the platform makes sure that the trader online is accessible, because I think that is important for many consumers. Either you can call them or write them or anything, and not just fill in these contact forms where you don't know if anybody ever reads it. So again, service, good service. I think that is key. Making a trustworthy business partner is important, but that is not in contradiction with giving consumers sufficient information. I hope that's enough.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm not sure if Christian is still with us, but I would also want to invite him if he would like to say something.
Go ahead, Ilya. I mean, you know the file in and out, so I think feel free to. I was wondering whether there was any questions on the legal representative, or whether you want to talk about that, or I mean, whatever you. I mean, you have prepared for the set of questions. I have probably some more general questions towards the end on the overall vision on the single market, but I suggest we first exhaust whatever we have from us and from our viewers on the DSA proposal.
Well, I can ask on something, maybe, because I think our views on the legal representative are quite aligned. I think from our perspective, you know, we support this idea that there should be a representative for a third country platform in the EU. At the same time, we are a bit concerned, like, will this legal representative always be able to comply with the obligations that it has, you know, and what happens when that legal representative cannot comply with those obligations? So we're also happy, I saw you did an amendment on, you know, they should have sufficient resources, and you also increased the liability, you know, for all the requirements in the DSA. And so maybe a twofold question. One, do you consider that enough? And two, and I think we proposed to some MEPs actually to go further. You know, why not make this legal representative responsible for any liabilities under EU law that this third marketplace or this third country marketplace might have?
I'm really open for anything when it comes to making this workable. You might be right in your idea. I will definitely look into it. I think you're right that it can be difficult, but I also think that we need to give it a shot. I mean, the fact that the platforms are very much afraid of this tells me that apparently it can be efficient some way, because they really have to do an effort to make sure that they know who the business traders are, and making sure that if they come from out of EU, that they have this representative, and I think along the fact that they have to do this will have an impact. But of course, you will probably still see some cases where it doesn't really work, and then we have to see what we can do there, because here it becomes a bit tricky, because if the platforms has made sure there was a representative, then they will not be liable. But what if this representative is not there, or we can't use it? Then what? And I think we need to look into this. So this is maybe not the perfect solution, but it's a step in the right direction, and I think that. But again, I'm open. So if we can find good solutions, even to improve this, I'm really willing to look into it. I need to make sure that I have a majority in the parliament. This might be difficult, and afterwards I have to also negotiate with the council. And even though I know some member states are really on the same side as we are here, I still also know that some would maybe not be so happy about it. But I think one of the things we really achieved in the internal market through our work during many years in establishing the internal market is this chain of responsibility that all the economic operators play an important role. Of course, the manufacturer is the main responsible for the good manufactured, the good produced, but everyone needs to play a role, and I think that should definitely also be the case for online platforms. So therefore, I think this is an attempt to go in the right direction. But listen, I will look very much into your suggestions and see if we can improve this. So let's see.
Thank you. And maybe just to respond to that. So I think it's very encouraging, obviously, to hear that you want to look in it, and about the I guess the chain of responsibility, as you just mentioned. So obviously, this is also something that we want to that we support very much. I think it's also important, if you're a retailer, at least on the product safety law, you are a distributor. And you have specific obligations, but you have not the same obligations to manufacture because you have not made that product, right? So it's very difficult to meet such standards. But I think from our perspective, I think at least there should be somebody. You should be able always to find somebody in the EU that is liable for product safety or is liable for consumer protection law. I'm not sure if we are 100% aligned on how to establish that, but I think you are well aware. But let's see how this debate will develop. But maybe one other question also linked to what people submitted is.
Ilja, can I just comment just on that? I know that we might not be completely agreeing on how we do it, but I think alone the fact that we agree that we need to do something in order to establish this chain of responsibility and legal representatives, and somebody needs really to be responsible for product safety, and if the platforms are not making sure that happens, then they will be liable. I think we can work on how we do it, but the fact that we agree that it is a problem is a good start, I have to say, and therefore I'm really open to look into how we can do it, but we need to do something. And if we don't do it, then we will not have created this level playing field. So that's just. But I know that some of the details we're not agreeing completely on. But I would be happy to discuss this with you further in the coming month.
And I think perhaps if I can add, because I've certainly been party to some of our internal discussion on this, and your experience with the GPSD, the Product Safety Directive, and now that you've had a quick look at the initial proposal, there's also the Product Liability Directive, there's CRD. There's a number of instruments where a number of these issues play into, and what for us is very important from a point of view of legal predictability and legal certainty is that that there is a level of consistency, and we know which instruments applies at which level. Because I can tell you, we even consulted external legal advisors on this to try to help us, finding through the maze of all these various issues of responsibilities, etc. So I think perhaps the key message to you is ensure that you work also with whoever are going to be rapporteurs on all these various instruments, so that at the end of the day, at the end of the tunnel, if you like, we have a consistent and very clear framework for all economic operators. Right. So I see Ilja.
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely, we need to make it workable. We need to make sure that they fit together, and we're not always good at doing that in EU with our legislation. So I really hope that we can do it this time. And the product safety proposal will, of course, also be a part of our discussion. It will be two different working processes. I still believe that it's important to make sure that they work together. So don't worry, I will have that in my mind as well.
Thank you. Ilya, you had another question, or?
Yeah, and actually it had to do with something that what you said earlier on the, I think on enforcement. So because I think one of the main issues is that we can come up with any new rules and any new types of new requirements, but I think at the same time, if we cannot enforce those rules, I mean, what are we doing it for? Because it basically makes it a bit meaningless. So I think, how do you think we can have a more efficient and effective enforcement at the EU borders? How can we ensure that the rules that we put on paper are really enforced? Because maybe if the rules that we have right now would have been enforced properly, we wouldn't have this problem right now.
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe you're right, but I think that this enforcement question is extremely important. When I thought about what we could do, I had many different ideas on the table. I was considering what's the most efficient way of making sure that it can be enforced. I thought about an agency, because if you made sure that you had some who were responsible for all digital rules, maybe that could be easy. But I ended up giving in my report more power to the EU Commission, together, of course, with the member states, because they will still have a huge responsibility as well for many reasons. I can come back to that, but I thought that the best. I learned, let me say it like this, I learned from the Dieselgate scandal. I was working as the S&D rapporteur on the type approval legislation for vehicles. And what we did there was that we realized that some member states did not comply with the rules, or they had to control the car industry, and they did not do it sufficient or efficient. And therefore we said, well, we need to have a control of the control. So we gave the EU Commission some tools. So they have to make sure that they have resources and expertise in-house, so they can control a certain number of cars, and then by that also kind of make control of whether the member states are doing what they're doing. And of course, then you have two layers, and I'm not sure that it's always the best thing, but in certain areas where it's really crucial for us that it is enforced, and especially when you have things where you have a cross-border aspect of it as well, then I really think it makes sense to give the Commission more power. So that's why I suggest that we do that in certain areas they have more competences, and we need to make sure that the digital service coordinators are in a close contact with the Commission as well, and also member state to member state. But we really need to do and look into this. I have tried to narrow down the time frames so that if you complain or do something that it doesn't, you get 3 months, and then the next level get 3 months, and then 3 months again, and then suddenly a year has passed and nothing has happened, and I don't like that. So but again, also here, if any good ideas can come up and help us. What is important is if we make a legislation, we need to make sure that it is implemented and enforced in a good manner. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time. When we talk about especially the big platforms, it makes sense to give the Commission more power to look into it, because I think that will be the best. But still, we have an issue on certain areas, and I'm still not. I haven't still decided finally which direction I should go. I have tabled things, but I'm not. I'm still open. and that is, we see that we have on illegal. We need to take down illegal content, whether it's a good or an expression. But what is illegal is in the world of goods probably the same throughout Europe, because we have a very good harmonized legislative framework there, but on other things like expressions, we don't have that. So in Germany, it is for many good reasons not allowed to deny Holocaust, but in my country it is, not because we like it, but we have another history and tradition. So here you have two different angles, and how do you do that with a legislation? So, but here, as it is now, the platforms, for instance, Facebook needs to make sure that it is taken down if it's targeted at German users, but if it's not, but Danish, then they don't have to take it down. We have to live with the fact that we are still different and we have different aspects. But the less it is, the better it is. And in the area of goods, I think that we have this legislative framework in place that makes it a little less complicated for the platforms, hopefully. But I mean, it's just complicated, this, and we have to discuss it thoroughly before we end up finding solutions. And here I'm also very interested in what the member states, what the council is going to say, because they are, by the end of the day, those who have to act on the basis of the legislation. So, but just to say that the Commission needs more power, I believe that's one of the ways to solve it. And then we have to look into whether we can do even more to harmonize or find ways to tackle it when we have different national legislations in place for other topics.
Fascinating indeed, and the complexity and the difficulty, and particularly since you have both the hate speech and the non-compliant goods all gobbled together in one proposal. I think that probably adds to the complexity. I know some of our members certainly initially, I think, would have wished probably have two separate proposals on that. I think would have made it probably easier, but that's already, the horse has left the barn, as we say, I think, on that one. So. I want to quiz you actually on AI and algorithm, because you said you expect a little bit more on liability, on transparency than what it was in the Commission's proposal. So on the other hand, I think there is also a sort of a general view from within business that algorithm, there's also something called trade secrets. Where do you see the balance between, on the one hand, protecting innovations, competitive edges on algorithm, and at the same time the need for providing, transparency and indeed possibly, liability on AI and algorithm?
Well, this is also a good question. I really hope that we are able to find the right balance between having transparency on algorithms in a way that makes it easier for authorities to look into whether they're complying with what they should, for instance, fundamental rights, and avoid misinformation and dark patterns. But at the same time, making sure that, of course, if you have a good business, you have the right to have secrets on how you do it. The recipe needs to be a secret, at least for your competitors. I think that well, we need to be clever in the way we do it. The authorities need, of course, to have access to everything. Otherwise, it's impossible for them. Here also, I think that the Commission plays a role. It's easy to give the Commission access to algorithms for the very large platforms rather than giving every member state access to it. But I think in order to make sure that the member states can check whether the platform is doing what it's supposed to do, they of course need to have access. Then the Commission is suggesting that researchers should have access as well, and I'm adding to that, saying that I think that civil society should have it, but of course in a way where it's not revealing trade secrets. That's very clear for me. That it needs to be like that. How we do it in practice, we can always discuss. We have also other legislative. We have also, the Copyright Directive and others where we have some of the same issues. But I think that access for authorities and others that can help us but not so much access that we end up not being able to have trade secrets. That balance we need to strike. How we do it is still a good question. We have to see where we end, but it doesn't change the fact that I believe that we need to look into algorithms and how they work, because they have such a huge impact on our society, and therefore I think, especially for the very large ones, where platforms becomes public spaces, there I really think it is important that we make sure that they are not compromising fundamental rights, that they're not compromising our democracy, and that they are really doing things in a way where we can protect users of platforms. So access is extremely important for the very large ones, those who really have a high impact, and less important, but to a certain extent also needed in order to make sure that the legislation is enforced for the smaller ones. But I think that we have to differentiate between big and smaller ones here. But I hope that, Christian, was enough. But it is interesting, and I also think that in many ways the AI legislation we also have to work with in IMCO very soon, when we have finalized the fight over who should do it. But I hope and expect it to stay in IMCO. Here we also have to look into risks of artificial intelligence, and I hope that can go hand in hand also with some of the things we're doing here on the DSA proposal.
Yeah, thank you. Ilya, do you have perhaps time for one more question before I have a more general questions on the overall vision of the single market?
Yeah, well, maybe it's another question, maybe something to add to what you just said. I think, with the transparency on the algorithms, I think it's also important that we keep in mind that, if we are too open, maybe to the wider public with all these reporting obligations, also, let's say the rogue trader or maybe, operators with malintent could actually abuse this knowledge to circumvent systems to detect illegal content online. So I think, and I think this is also one of our concerns, like, you need to find the right balance, because you give too much information, okay, you can have full transparency, but then it will be very easy for people who want to abuse the rules to abuse the rules, actually. So, that doesn't really question, but if you have another question, Christian, please go ahead.
Well, I think probably a fairly general question. I think indeed on the overall vision of the single market. You've been in the Parliament for 15 years. Many of those years in the IMCO, perhaps all of those years in the IMCO. So I think you've seen it all from I guess the days of Malcolm Harbour and others. So where do you see, challenges and overall vision for the single market? Because there are some people that are a bit negative and saying the single market should have been completed in 1992, and yet I think I normally respond to those people that says, well, there are a number of dimensions that actually have been added to the single market over these last 20-30 years. Initially it was foreseen only for goods. Services have been added to it with the Services Directive. Now we talk about capital markets, etc. So what is your overall vision? Now we have digital, indeed, a major element being added to that was totally unknown in those years, in the sort of the Delors and Lord Cockfield years. How do you see remaining challenges and overall things that the EU would still need to tackle in terms of the single market?
This is a huge question, Christian. Here in the
I know you can tackle it.
Debate. Yeah, no, but it's so fascinating because I became a member of the Parliament's IMCO committee when Arlene McCarthy was a chair, and thereafter Malcolm Harbour came in. I'm a very, very big fan of Europe's internal market, single market. It's a big achievement, and I see it in many ways like you do, that it is not completed for good reasons, because we keep on adding new layers to the internal market, depending on the needs of our societies. And today we have added all these things about digitalization, and that's how it is. I think that we will never ever finalize the single market, but we need to be have respect and be happy about what we have achieved, even though we still have to do it even better in many ways. Enforcement is still a problem. We still have problems for companies. For instance, in the area of public procurement, could we still do better? We still have kind of borders, and we still have unfair commercial practices. So we still can do a lot of things, but I see it as something that will never ever be complete, because the society develops and therefore the single market will develop. But what we have achieved today is amazing, and the main problem is maybe that I think that we have a tendency in the EU to make things very, very complicated, and we forget. I'm not a fan of one in, one out, but I think that we should maybe consider sometimes, when we make new legislation, to look into the old one. Does it still work? Could we do something to make that work better, so that you don't have to have a very big complexity for businesses? It is difficult, and it is time consuming being a business at the single market, and the same goes, by the way, for consumers. And let me just, since I'm here in the airport, mention consumer rights for air passengers. Yeah. So in many ways here, but so I'm a big fan. I see that it will never ever be finalized, completed, because the society develops, and since the society develops, the single market will develop along their lines. Look at the COVID-19 crisis, how that impacted the way we look at it for the health union and all the things we need to do in that area. But I just finally here, I'm a big fan of the single market, and I think that it is a huge achievement we have made here. Maybe we should still keep on strengthening the smaller ones. Maybe we could do more in terms of competition. Maybe it's not fair enough still, etc., etc. So there are plenty of things we can still work on, adjust and do better. But I think we have done a lot, and we need to keep on working on it. As long as we have the European Union, we will probably keep on working on improving the single market. But I'm a big fan, and that's also why I still work in the IMCO committee, because I think that here you're in the heart of what makes sense of the European Union. Thanks.
Well, and I think we need more people like you to really continue to champion the internal market, because we have, as I often say, I think we're the biggest fan of the single market, because we play into the single market, but we're also in a way its most difficult customers, because we suffer. I think our sector suffer a great deal. Because of lack of single market. Sometimes procedure takes too long. We have a number of member states, unfortunately, who are very, nationalistic, protectionist in the single market. And we've seen it in a number of areas. We see a lot of sort of food nationalism in a way happening in a number of member states. Most notably in Central Eastern Europe, but not only. We see it also in a number of other countries. We see, unfortunately, also a number of member states continue to gold-plate legislation, and we've seen it recently now with the Unfair Trading Practices Directive, where as soon as you have a directive, member states, because of the national politics going on, and as a result of that, you basically defeat the purpose of having a single market. So I think I often say that, why not just have a regulation, because at least it will be implemented all in the same way. So maybe there's need to have more enforcing powers to the European Commission. We're putting a lot of faith in what Commissioner Breton is trying to do with the Single Market Enforcement Task Force, etc. Those are all, I think, steps in the right direction, and I know you and certainly all your colleagues in the IMCO, but I think from the European Parliament, I think if we can continue to be an important voice in that, I think it would be very important for us as a retail and wholesale sector that strives on the efficiency of trade, on providing consumers and business customers, for the wholesalers, the best choice at the best prices, but that only functions on on the basis of being able to tap into the single market. I mean, we see fragmentation of the single market by suppliers in terms of on the FMC, on the fast-moving consumer goods, where retailers have to source the products in the divisions in the different countries. So I think there's a number of dimension there where I think the single market need to do better. I mean, we always compare Europe with the United States, where you have a little bit more. I mean, yes, you also have state legislation in the United States, but and that doesn't mean we immediately call for the F word, F in this case being federalism. But I think that is I think quite important, and perhaps as sort of some of closing thoughts from my perspective. Christel, unless you want to add anything, I think otherwise, just a couple of words.
I just want to thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the DSA, my suggestions, and this very good exchange of view. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting me. And let's keep on having our dialogue going, and especially also for the coming months when this is going to be very important to find the right balances in the DSA. So thank you very much for today.
No, but thank you very much for your participation in this. We really much, I think, appreciate your openness, and indeed having someone with a wide experience and good insights on a very important piece of legislation. And thank you for the invitation to continue to contribute to achieving an important piece of legislation, with you and all the other parties, as we heard from you, hopefully under the finalizing under the French presidency in the beginning of next year. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Ilya as well for helping me and getting the discussion on this very important topic. I want to thank all our viewers. This actually session will conclude our series of policy talks for the first half of the year. I mean, there's still another good 3 weeks of hard work in Brussels, Strasbourg, and everywhere in Europe before the EU goes into summer recess in the month of August. But we will actually have more EU policy talk when comes the month of September. I can already lift the veil a little bit. We will have a policy talk with Commissioner Wojciechowski in September, and we'll also have a policy talk with Olivier Gerson, who is the competition chief. Of course, the competition chief is EVP Vestager, but the Director General of DG Competition, Olivier Gerson. So that will make for useful exchanges, and there's a few more. So stay tuned to EuroCommerce. You will be invited, and if you found this interesting, share it with your friends and colleagues. These are open talks. We want to involve everyone in listening and bringing in questions. And Christel, again, thank you very much for your participation, and to all have a very good end of the afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.